This as the lieutenant governor of the state, Justin Fairfax, well, he has been facing a second accusation of sexual assault. And the state's attorney general, Mark Herring, well, he's acknowledged that he wore blackface decades ago. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shaw.
And I'm Arthel Neville. The embattled Governor Northam aiming to stay in the public's favor as he refuses to step down. Meantime, politicians from both sides of the aisle calling on the Lieutenant Governor Fairfax to resign amid this new allegation, with one state senator threatening to introduce articles of impeachment.
A woman in the United States is sexually assaulted every 98 seconds. As the father of 3 young girls, I cannot stand by silently while the Lieutenant Governor is facing multiple credible allegations of sexual assault. I believe these women. He needs to resign immediately.
Ellison Barber live in Richmond, Virginia with the very latest. Ellison?
Hi, Arthel. So, yeah, a lot has been happening here. We're just now hearing from the governor for the first time since that racist yearbook photo surfaced. He still says that he is not in that photo, and he says that he overreacted when he initially said that he was in the photo. You'll remember that was a photo that had someone dressed in a KKK robe and another person in blackface. Governor Ralph Northam told the Washington Post there is a higher reason for what's happened in the last week. He says he'll stay in office and over the next 3 years look at the issue of white privilege and inequity. He said this, quote, "There are ongoing inequities to access to things like education, healthcare, mortgages, capital, entrepreneurship. And so this has been a real, I think, an awakening for Virginia. It has really raised the level of awareness for racial issues in Virginia. And so we're ready to learn from our mistakes." We were speaking with the chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia when the Washington Post published that interview. The interview from the governor did not change the chairman's mind, Chairman Jack Wilson's mind. He says that the governor and the attorney general, both who have admitted to wearing blackface at least once, need to go.
I'm not sure what the next steps would be, because I'm hoping that both Governor Northam and Attorney General Herring will do the right thing and resign. The blackface episodes in both of their past, I think, are disqualifying. We've called on both of them to resign, and we think that's the best for the Commonwealth.
But the chairman stopped short of calling for the resignation of Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, who is accused of sexual assault by 2 different women.
We have not yet called for Lieutenant Governor's resignation because we want to be consistent. We thought the piling on of National Democrats and others in the Judge Kavanaugh hearings was inappropriate, and we think that the facts should be investigated before any conclusions are drawn. It is interesting, again, that some of the Democrats are now changing their opinion on investigate. They've called for his resignation, but we think due process to a certain extent should be followed.
2 women have accused the Lieutenant Governor of forceful sexual assault. One, Dr. Vanessa Tyson, who you see on your screen there, she says she forced him to perform oral sex in a hotel room during the 2004 DNC convention. Another woman says that Justin Fairfax, the lieutenant governor, raped her in 2000 while they were both students at Duke University. The lieutenant governor denies it. He says he is the victim of a vicious smear campaign. He has asked for an investigation into this, and he is vowing at this point, Arthel, to clear his name.
Ellison Barber, thank you very much. Eric?
Othello, Washington, those border security talks will now be going down to the wire. You know, another partial government shutdown deadline, or that, is only 6 days away. This is congressional negotiators are hard at work over this weekend. They're trying to hammer out a compromise by Monday, but the clock is ticking down to that February 15th deadline, and both sides are hoping to find a deal that everyone, especially President Trump, can live with.
We can definitely do a deal, and the president's shown a willingness to compromise. We need leadership, particularly in the House, to do the same. What we need is something we can pass through the Congress and that the president will accept.
I'm willing to take what the conference committee comes up with, and I'm willing to empower my Democratic colleagues to give a little. I think we have to commit to this process. We have to, at the end of the day, be willing to govern.
So what will they come up with, and will the president agree? Garrett Henney, live from the north lawn of the White House with more. Hi, Garrett.
Eric, good afternoon to you. The clock is certainly ticking. Lawmakers say with the way congressional rules work that this conference committee will likely need to come up with a deal by Monday in order to avoid another partial government shutdown. And we're hearing some mixed messages in terms of where the negotiations are. We're told that there has been a lot of progress made over the last few days and that a deal will ultimately be made. But the lingering question is, will President Trump sign off on whatever agreement they come up with? We're told that any agreement will likely include far less funding for border security than the $5.7 billion the president previously demanded. It'll likely be somewhere between $1.3 and $1.6 billion. Despite that, on Thursday, after meeting with the president at the White House, Senator Richard Shelby said he did see a light at the end of the tunnel with all of this.
I don't know if he'd sign whatever we came up with, but I had a very positive conversation with the president and the vice president earlier today, and I believe he was very reasonable with us. I think that we're on a positive trajectory course now.
Yeah, the president may be able to justify signing off on a deal with less than $5.7 billion because there is a limited amount of money the executive branch can tap into without congressional approval, and that would allow the president to essentially tap off on or add on to whatever this deal includes. Now, as these negotiations continue, with that in mind, Vice President Mike Pence said that the president will get his wall built one way or the other.
When it comes to our southern border, as the negotiations continue, we will not rest, we will not relent until our Customs and Border Protection have the technology, the personnel, and the barriers required to secure our border. We're going to build that wall one way or another. I promise you.
This weekend, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is hosting a group of Republicans and Democrats for a retreat at Camp David. And these negotiations over border security are not going to be a focus of those discussions, but we're told that they will certainly be coming up. Eric?
All right, Garrett, thanks so much. Marthel?
And Eric, for more on this, we're going to bring in Jill Colvin now. She's the White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Jill, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So where does the deal stand now? I mean, where's the common ground and what are the sticking points?
Well, right now, Democrats and Republicans have been trading offers back and forth, trying to come up with a number for border wall funding. As Garrett said, it sounds like the number that they're going to wind up settling on is somewhere around that $1.6 billion mark, which is, of course, what the Senate had proposed back in December before that longest in history government shutdown. But there are also other sticking points in the negotiation beyond just the number. There are conversations happening about where barriers would be allowed to be built, what kind of barriers would be allowed to be built, and also other questions. Things like how many beds ICE and other border agents would be allowed to be funded under this legislation. So they're still going back and forth. The hope is that they will have something in place by Monday that they can bring to the White House and present to the president.
And, you know, Republican leaders do not want another shutdown. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell already told the president that would be a big mistake. But what are the chances that President Trump will declare a national emergency?
Well, there's certainly no appetite in Washington for another government shutdown at any side of Pennsylvania Avenue, especially among Republicans who really bore a lot of the brunt of the blame there. The question, though, is whether this deal is something that the president is willing to accept. This is a president who, for months now, has said that he will not accept anything less than $5.7 billion, and this deal doesn't look like it's going to provide that much money for him. That said, the White House has consistently said that they're also looking at other pots of money. If Congress won't give them the amount that the president wants, that they're willing to use, whether it's an emergency declaration or other kinds of executive authority that they believe that they can use to access other pots of money. And so what we could see is a situation where the president agrees to what the conference committee comes up with, but then decides either immediately or at some point in the future to start at least trying to access other pots of money. Now, certainly there will be legal challenges, or they're expected to be, if he chooses that road. But you can see the president and the White House trying to figure out how they might be able to access other pots of money to try to be able to spin this as a win as we enter the 2020 campaign season.
Let me rewind to this past Tuesday, play a little sound from the president at the State of the Union address. Let's listen.
Most of the people in this room voted for a wall, but the proper wall never got built. I will get it built. This is a smart, strategic, see-through steel barrier not just a simple concrete wall.
And Beto O'Rourke is tweeting this afternoon. He's going after the president on immigration, saying, quote, if immigrants are good for the country, the border is secure, and walls end lives instead of saving them, then why does the president try to scare us about immigrants and the border and take our land to build a wall we don't need? So, as you well know, Jill, the president is heading to El Paso, Texas, Monday. Is it to see the Texas town, the border town in person, the border crossing in person? Or will this be a campaign rally? And will we hear a chance of build the wall again?
This is being billed as a campaign rally. We'll see if the White House decides to add any formal events onto the schedule. But the president now, for several months, has been talking about El Paso as kind of an example of the success of border walls. He's been criticized by for people who live in El Paso for exaggerating what the crime levels were like before the barrier was built there and exaggerating the extent to which the barriers made any difference. So you'll see Beto O'Rourke and other Democrats who will be gathering, sort of doing a dueling rally, competing with the president, making the case that he is wrong about border barriers, about walls, that that's not what is needed. But what you see developing here is how central this debate about the wall, about a border barrier, is going to be going into the 2020 election. The president, as you can tell by the fact that this is really, you could argue, his first 2020 rally, and he's choosing to do it right there in a border state. He wants to make this a key part of his re-election campaign, and you already see Democrats trying to use this to rally their base against the president.
All right, we'll be following it, and we'll have you back again, Jill Colvin, White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for much more of this and the political turmoil in Virginia on the Ingram Angle Monday night, Laura is going to sit down with President Trump in El Paso, Texas. That begins at 10 p.m. Eastern right here on the Fox News channel.
Well, we started earlier here on the Fox News channel. We covered it live. Senator Elizabeth Warren in Lawrence, Massachusetts, officially announcing her candidacy for President of the United States. So, how are our chances in an already crowded and growing Democratic field? Our political panel will take up that debate. You know, the new concerns that China could be targeting students at American colleges. Texas Senator Ted Cruz calls it a concerted, organized, systematic attack against America. What he is now doing about it. Plus, President Trump looking to maintain a cordial relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ahead of their second summit in a couple of weeks. But is the regime really willing to give up its nuclear weapons?
Much work remains to be done, but my relationship with Kim Jong-un is a good one. Chairman Kim and I will meet again on February 27th and 28th in Vietnam.
President Trump is preparing to hold his second summit with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, later this month. The two agreeing to meet in Hanoi. That'll happen in Vietnam on February 27th and 28th. With the president appearing to throw his confidence behind the North Korean dictator in this tweet, saying, quote, North Korea under the leadership of Kim Jong-un will become a great economic powerhouse. He may surprise some, but he won't surprise me because I have gotten to know him and fully understand how capable he is. North Korea will become a different kind of rocket, an economic one. Will it? Gordon Chang joins us, Asian analyst as well as foreign affairs journalist and author. So, Gordon, what concrete steps and what do you think can actually come out of this meeting, if anything, when the president sits down with Chairman Kim?
You know, people are talking about the North Koreans agreeing to close their Yongbin reactor. That produces plutonium. But that's an old reactor dating back to the early 1980s. And I think the North Koreans would close it anyway because it's dangerous to operate. The two things that we really need, Eric, are, first of all, a declaration of all missile and nuke facilities, and second of all, a timetable for disarmament. That, I think, is the minimum of what President Trump should get at this summit. And if he doesn't get it, that would be a disappointment.
Do you think that Kim is sincere or that he actually would surrender his nuclear weapons, or as the intelligence community says, he will never do that?
Yeah, I think the intelligence assessment from Dan Coats is wrong when he says it's unlikely that the North Koreans would ever give up their weapons, because this is not a North Korea question. This is a U.S. question. The question is whether the U.S. will apply enough pressure on the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, and the South Koreans so that Kim has no choice but to surrender his nukes and his missiles. We can do this without the use of force. So I don't think that this is a question of North Korea's attention. Of course they want to keep their weapons. It's a question of what we will do to force them to do the right thing.
And what would you like to see us and other countries do in order to achieve that?
Well, first of all, I think that we need to start going after the Chinese banks that have been continuing to launder money. We know that the Chinese and the Russians and the South Koreans have been transferring oil and other commodities to the North Koreans. We need to get them to stop that. We need sanctions on Moscow, Beijing, and Seoul. And these are things that are within our power to do.
That's a pretty heavy lift. That's a lot.
It's a lot, but, you know, American presidents, and not just the current one, have said North Korea poses an existential challenge to the U.S., a danger to the American homeland. Well, if that's true, Eric, then we need to use American power to stop this. And the American people should be asking their presidents, why haven't you used American power to protect us?
And you talk about American power. What about human rights? And I think of Otto Warmbier, the young American college student who was so brutally tortured, beaten, and murdered. Otto, there's that proposal to name a street here in New York in front of the North Korean mission to the UN after Otto. That is in the New York City Council. Has the issue of human rights kind of been swept under the rug for now and forgotten? And what is your view of that?
Oh, well, certainly, because if you go back to the last State of the Union, you had Ji Chung-ho, the North Korean escapee who was run over by a rail train. He was in the gallery, and that was an electric moment. This past State of the Union, there was no mention of North Korea human rights. So, yes, it has been swept under the carpet.
Meanwhile, there's growing concern. Gordon, stay right there. I want to ask you about this. The new reports that China, that they've been working to recruit spies at American universities to steal research and influence what's being taught to our young people about China. Well, Texas Senator Ted Cruz and some top intelligence officials, they're raising alarms about this, looking at one Chinese academic program that's on campuses across the country. That is called the Confucius Institute. So I sat down with the senator this past week, and he filled us in about the growing threat of what he's calling for to protect us. U.S. intelligence agencies continue to warn of Beijing spying activities in the U.S., commercial espionage, and the stealing of intellectual property.
The Chinese counterintelligence threat is more deep, more diverse, more vexing, more challenging, more comprehensive, and more concerning than any counterintelligence threat I can think of.
A report from the Director of National Intelligence is blunt. Quote, China's intelligence services will exploit the openness of American society, especially academia and the scientific community. And now lawmakers are focused on new allegations of China's attempts to influence American academia.
It is widespread and it's dangerous, and this is legislation designed to stop that.
Senator from Texas.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz is reintroducing legislation from last year called the Stop Higher Education Espionage and Theft Act.
Too many universities, I think, are gullible, are not realizing the magnitude of this threat. This is a concerted, organized, systematic threat to undermine our universities and undermine our economy, and we need to be serious combating it.
Several current and former Chinese students have been convicted in U.S. courts for espionage. Just recently, Jai Chaquin, who had studied electrical engineering at the Illinois Institute of Technology, was arrested and accused of working for Chinese intelligence to recruit spies. He is awaiting trial. But it is not just spying. Senator Cruz is also raising the alarm about a Chinese-backed academic program currently on more than 100 U.S. campuses. It's called the Confucius Institute, and critics allege it is indoctrinating American students with regime propaganda.
I passed into law legislation targeting in particular Confucius Institutes and institutes being funded by the communist government in China.
We do share concerns about the Confucius Institutes. We've been watching that development for a while. It's just one of many tools that they take advantage of.
The key risk is that the American public and the students hear a one-sided view of what's going on in China.
Rochelle Peterson, policy director of the conservative-leaning National Association of Scholars, says they should all be shut down.
At these Confucius Institutes, the teachers are hand-selected and paid by the Chinese government. The textbooks are being sent over and paid for by the Chinese government. Really, the only way to protect against these kinds of incursions from the Chinese government is to close down the institute. There really is no safe way to operate a Confucius Institute that still protects academic freedom.
Senator Cruz says it's past time to send Beijing a strong message.
The Chinese Communist government is a dictatorship. and it is cruel and repressive. It tortures and murders its citizens, and dictatorships hate sunlight. They hate truth. You know, we're sitting here in my Senate office. Over my shoulder here, I don't know if the camera can get this. This is a picture, a painting of Ronald Reagan standing before the Brandenburg Gate. And up above, written in German, are the words, "Tear down this wall," in the style of the graffiti on the Berlin Wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, I think those are the most important words said by any leader in modern times. That's what the Chinese government fears. They fear sunlight, so they spend money trying to stifle academic freedom in our universities. And universities shouldn't be willing to sell their academic freedom. They shouldn't be willing to allow the communist government to have control over discussion.
The Confucius Institute U.S. Center issued a statement which reads in part, "They are programs dedicated to the teaching of Mandarin, cultivating Chinese cultural awareness, and facilitating global education. The programs do not teach history, politics, or current affairs. The courses are managed and supervised by U.S. universities, which also decide the content, instructors, and textbooks." Despite that defense, Peterson has reservations.
The American people need to know that what they're hearing about China may not be true. It may be influenced by the Chinese government's PR campaign, and even from the halls of academia, which are supposed to be trustworthy and respected, it may even be happening there.
Well, it may even be happening there. Gordon Chang is still with us. Gordon, about 350,000 Chinese nationals, students are here, and you think the vast, vast majority are students, not inserted by Beijing to spy. But what type of threat is this, and how widespread do you think it is by Beijing?
This is really important, Eric, because you have there's a lot of students here, and only a few of them are problems. But the issue here is not so much the students, but it's the United States has allowed the Ministry of State Security and Chinese diplomats from the embassy and the 5 consulates to actually work with these students surreptitiously. And it's not only just spying, it's also they've been working with these students so they demonstrate on U.S. campuses, demonstrate off campuses. So this is affecting our democracy, and we've permitted this for a very long time. So this is as much a Washington problem as it is a Beijing problem, but this is clearly going to be at the top of the agenda, and your reporting on this is so critical to our national security.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, you're talking about basically a major propaganda and influence operation that's under the covers right here trying to brainwash our students.
Well, it is the, first of all, the Confucius Institutes, as you point out. It's the Confucius classrooms in secondary schools, and it's the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which also works on these campuses, which Beijing uses to surveil Chinese students while they're in the United States. And by the way, there's also branches, formal branches of China's Communist Party that operate on our campuses. So this is an extensive operation. It's run by the Communist Party, and we have allowed this to continue, and it's got to stop, as Senator Cruz mentions.
Senator Cruz has that bill. What do you hope happens to that bill, and how do we stop it?
Yeah, we need basically a legislation which would say that no university may maintain a Confucius Institute if it receives federal funding. I mean, it's got to be that broad. We had something close last year in the John McCain National Defense Appropriations Act, which said no university could operate a CI, a Confucius Institute, if it got Defense Department money. But it needs to be broader than this, and we need to support President Cruz's legislation.
Senator Cruz has that bill in the Senate now. The Confucius Institute USA, as we reported, indicates they're there as a educational institution, but clearly a lot of questions, and it's a growing controversy with some colleges shutting those branches down. Gordon Chang, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course. Arthel.
Okay, Eric and Gordon. Well, Senator Elizabeth Warren officially launching her presidential bid as she works to move past controversy over her ancestry. We're live from the campaign trail ahead. Plus, as 2020 Democrats rush to embrace the Green New Deal.
Futures, and we will not turn back. My daddy ended up as a janitor, but his little girl got the chance to be a public school teacher, a college professor, a United States senator, and a candidate for president of the United States.
Well, there you have it. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren making it official, launching her campaign for the White House amidst swirling controversy over her long-standing claims of Native American heritage. She joins a growing field of Democratic hopefuls vying for the chance to challenge President Trump in 2020. Senator Warren making the announcement today at an event in Lawrence, Massachusetts. That is where Molly Line joins us. It's very chilly out there, Molly, right?
Absolutely, Arthel, and that is how Senator Warren started her event today, thanking the very hardy crowd for braving the cold and blustery day that it just happens to be. We're here in Lawrence. That's the backdrop that was chosen. This, of course, an old mill town that saw its heyday 100 years or so ago, now one of the poorest communities in Massachusetts. And this was something Elizabeth Warren was trying to highlight, essentially economic fairness across America is what she believes that she is fighting for, a fair deal for all Americans.
This is the fight of our lives, the fight to build an America where dreams are possible, an America that works for everyone.
Warren touched on criminal justice reform, equal justice for all. She hit Wall Street, touched on climate change, child care, Medicare, and reiterated her mantra of critiquing a rigged system. She said corporations have too much power, and she struck out against the president, against the Trump administration on the issue of corruption, touting her own anti-corruption legislation.
We all know the Trump administration is the most corrupt in living memory. But even after Trump is gone, it won't do just to do a better job of running a broken system. We need to take power in Washington away from the wealthy and well-connected and put it back in the hands of the people where it belongs.
This announcement for a White House run comes in the wake of a pretty tough week for the senator, who found herself apologizing yet again regarding her claims of Native American heritage after her registration for the state bar of Texas, filed in 1986, surfaced this week and showed that she had wrote that her race was American Indian. She recently offered a personal apology to the chief